What's up, everyone? On today's episode of the podcast, we'll be exploring an essential topic for young girls cycle tracking. My guest, Holly Grigg-Spall, is a well known author and researcher in the field of women's health, whose work has inspired many to question the pharmaceutical industry's approach to birth control. Definitely check out her book, Sweetening the Pill, and the movie it inspired, The Business of Birth Control, produced by Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein. So today, I'm excited to talk to her about Teena, a new cycle tracking device designed specifically for tweens and teens. As young girls enter puberty, understanding and tracking their menstrual cycles can be confusing and overwhelming. I mean, it's pretty confusing and overwhelming for us adults too. This is where Teena comes in, an easy to use device that empowers young girls to understand their bodies better. During our conversation, Holly shares her insights on the importance of cycle tracking for young girls and how Teena is helping to fill the gap left by sex education classes. And this gap is really big, by the way. Holly also shares a heartwarming story about a 9-year-old girl who uses Teena to prepare for her first period, highlighting the device's positive impact on young girls' self-esteem and body confidence. So if you're a parent, educator, or you're just curious about women's health and cycle tracking, tune into this informative and inspiring episode to learn more about why cycle tracking matters and how Teena is changing the game for young girls everywhere. Hi, Holly. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. Is this my second time or my
It is.
third time?
I
Second
think
time,
so.
yeah.
Second time, I
Yeah,
think. Yes. Yeah, I know, right?
yeah.
I know. I was going to say, welcome back to the show. It's been a long time since
It has. I
we've
feel
had
like
you
that was
on.
maybe 2015, like
No way.
2016.
Was it that
I think it
long?
may have been quite some
Whoa.
time ago,
Well,
yes.
the podcast has changed significantly since then, that's for sure. Yes, I feel like, and then back then we were talking about Sweetening the Pill, your book, your cult classic. Yes, and I think back to those days, and you know what it actually reminded me of is when we first started talking about Daisy, and I had you come on or I come on the blog and sort of do a guest blog with me about Daisy, and because it was brand new, it was 2016. I was just having this conversation the other day with the women in my certification program because I was talking about the first time I ever got pushback online. And it was with the Daisy blog because all these fertility awareness practitioners were really mad about Daisy and this
Yeah.
technology. And they came at us, and I couldn't believe it. And I was thinking back and I was remembering how we were having this conversation, I was pretty stressed about it, but you took it in stride because you had so much drama with because you were this person who put out a book called Sweetening the Pill, all about all the problems with birth control. So I felt like you had
Yeah.
really taken a beating for all of us back then.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like with the book, like it's like anything, like people project so much onto you when you do something, like you put out any kind of content, which I'm sure you know as well.
Oh, yes.
And then you get put in a certain box that they've chosen for you, right? Which is natural. You know, everybody likes to sort of figure out what people are about and make decisions based on their own
True.
needs and goals. And then if you don't fit into that box quite, or you make a step outside of it, people can get very upset. And you know, like I think like my book initially was very much thought of as like, oh well, this is great because it's sort of pushing forward the idea of fertility awareness method and like how important that is to women. And but I don't, you know, it's I think you know, then, you know, I wasn't a fertility awareness instructor, and I got, you know, heat for various things I said in the book that people didn't see as fully accurate. Like, for example, I wasn't didn't go in at length into the different types of fertility awareness, you know, and I just talked about the one type of fertility awareness and the one study. So yeah, I was very like practiced in knowing like when you get accepted by a community, you don't necessarily take that for granted. I ended up getting banned from the fertility awareness method Facebook group, which I'm still pretty bitter about considering. Because I do think I did a lot of great PR for fertility awareness method in the last
Yeah.
10 years. So
What?
yeah, so you know, I was pretty aware of that. But then, yes, with Daisy, unfortunately, you know, the certain people took real just like to the company, even though, this is a company that's like family run, small, been around for several decades, truly good, ethical, good values, the way they treat the people they work with, the way they do business, who they are, it's all so good and above board and like moral and like, just very like a very like trustworthy company from the top, from the bottom up and from the top down. And for some reason that company became like the pariah for that community. And I, as somebody who had written about technology in a skeptical way in my own book and like understood that, but also understood that like different choices for different people at different times in their lives, and also knew from all the media I'd done after the book that people really didn't feel that that charting without some kind of additional help or having to pay a lot of money for training was feasible for everybody, and that this was such a great idea. It should be more feasible for more people. I knew there was all these aspects to it that I felt made Daisy like a viable choice, and I was really excited about it. But yeah, it was a really, I feel there's still people who feel that way, which again, considering how the landscape has changed since then and all the other companies that have come and gone through that time, it is, interesting that the focus was on a company, that you wouldn't be able to find anything in the way that it worked that was like concerning, because of that they're very like, they've never taken outside investment. They don't have an investor board that knows nothing about fertility awareness and only wants to make a profit. It's all about sustainability and working like really connectedly with the customers and the people who use the product. So anyway, yes.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that.
I didn't
And
expect you to bring that up, but
I know,
that's
right? But it's a big part of this conversation, I feel like, because we've evolved to the Teena, and we're going to get into all of that, to their product, the Teena. And I really want to talk about this because I'm completely blown away by it, and I'm just loving all of the content that has been created around it. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that there is, something so strange that's happened in our women's health space where, there seems to be people have taken sides, and it's a little weird. But I just distinctly remembered that moment with you, because I was so taken aback, and I felt like, well, Holly's definitely experienced this to some degree because of her book, and sort of being the first person who really came out and talked about the pill honestly, and had a different perspective on it to really, to anyone at that time. Nobody had really talked disparagingly about birth control, or talked honestly about their negative experiences with it. And you did
and
that.
it's a great point, because all my energy has always been on the pharmaceutical industry and the the illegitimate and ways that they sell their products and the research they hide and the advertising, etc., which is what we should all be rallied around, right? Is that real problem that has such a deep and serious impact. And so, yeah, it was very strange, kind of Twilight Zone, to see a group of people attacking a company that was doing something, perfectly legitimate and valid in the fertility awareness space, instead of like, in deflecting and misdirecting from like, for me, obviously, with my work, is the real issue, which is the pharmaceutical industry. So,
Yep, I completely agree. Yeah, and we could go on. We'll save that conversation for another day. But let's get into this, right? Because this is our fundamental problem, right? This lack of education, this lack of body literacy and awareness of what's going on with our menstrual cycles. And I got to tell you, I watched the video. I think it's pinned on your Instagram account, the Teena Instagram account, that is, of the 9-year-old girl, Ella, who tracks her basal body temperature with the Teena device. And everyone who's listening, we're going to get into all of what this is in preparation for her first ovulation, so that she's going to know when to expect her first period. And I was completely blown away. I watched it like 5 times. I was like, wait a second, this 9-year-old girl has more knowledge about her body than most adult women I encounter. Certainly more than I did at, any really age. So where'd you find her? Who is this girl? So amazed by her.
Well, her mother, Carolyn, has been using Daisy for years and years and years. And
Oh,
obviously, like women who are doing that themselves, like often look back and go, oh, I wish I was doing this sooner, or I wish I knew about this earlier. And so, if they have daughters who are like tweens, like 8 and above, or teenagers, this is like to them perfect. You're providing a basal body temperature based device that isn't giving any like fertility information. It's just giving cycle phase information, ovulation, and then predicting menstruation. So it's designed completely for that age group.
yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really cool. And I just have so much hope. And when I saw it, I was just completely blown away. I was almost crying actually, because I was just thinking, wow, if that I had anything like that at not even that age, maybe even 12, 13, 14, it would just 100% have changed my whole life. And so I'm curious from you why you decided to start talking more about body literacy for tweens and teens, because I know you've been obviously focused on us adult ladies for a long time now.
Yeah, and I think, I've always in my work said, that we should be looking at teaching this information from high school or appropriate age onwards. I've always said that, and it's always been about body literacy. It's not about teaching fertility awareness method to teenagers. That's a completely separate conversation. And I think it's important to make that distinction for lots of reasons. And one of the big ones for me was like, so I started talking to the company about this, and we were chatting about how we could do it, and there are different ways to do it. And one big thing we were doing was looking at everything that was out there already, the books, the other apps, obviously, the websites, all the educational materials that were out there.
Mm,
And most of what teens and tweens get is coming from a place of, first of all, the menstrual cycle is about your ability to get pregnant someday,
yeah.
and your ability to be a mother someday, and you're becoming a woman someday. You're becoming a woman in having your period. So it's very much focused on reproductive ability. And I thought, well, we don't do that with adult women anymore. We acknowledge that menstrual cycles are valuable in their own right. They're a vital sign and creator of health, and that they feed into your short-term and long-term health and wellness and well-being and experience of life, right? So why aren't tweens and teens allowed access to that too? And also, isn't that so much more attractive and engaging and interesting and empowering and confidence making and enjoyable to an 8-year-old than telling an 8-year-old, oh, well, you're going to get a period, in the next 1, 2, 3 years, and that will mean that someday you can have a baby. Like, I just felt like, to me, that was like not something I had interest. Maybe some 8-year-olds that makes them happy to hear that, but for a lot of 8-year-olds, that's kind of like, may cause anxiety, or may just be not something they associate with at all, or have any real association with at that point in their lives.
Terrifying.
Um,
That's what I would think.
yes,
Yeah, at that age.
yes.
Yes.
I felt that's how I felt, to put it honestly. I felt like I went back in my mind and I thought, wow, like that is not, why are we still doing that? Why are
Right.
all these educational materials, bar one? There was one great book by a woman called Millie Hill in England that doesn't do that, but there's a
Yes.
body literacy book, yes.
I've had her on
But
the show. She's
literally bar
fabulous.
one,
Yeah.
yes. Everything else I could find. And we talked through this through, with the team. And I really advocated from the start that it should be a menstrual cycle educational portal. And all that I worked on in the app, my concern was mainly the app is all free. So you can go download it right now. It's all free. You can use it to start the conversation with your tweener teen. Your tweener teen can download it themselves and like learn and look at their own pace. So my concern was like, no, this should all be a wellness and well-being based. So the cycle as building health, strength, and learning who you are and building who you are through puberty. And that's what I wanted it to be about, because that's what I was like, well, why wouldn't that be the message at that time in your life? And how and also the big practical part of it, so folding in the tracker part of it, the idea for me, and I think this is something where, even fertility awareness educators can get on board with, is that basal body temperature can accurately predict period, because you can use it to know when you've ovulated, and then it's usually a pretty simple, somewhat 2-week around countdown to when the next period will come. Now, so much stress is caused by like not knowing when your period's going to come as a tween or teen, your first period, like you mentioned, but also subsequent periods. And so folding in that aspect of it, I was like, well, that has obviously major value to that age group, right? To know when your period's going to come.
Right. It's huge in that I think about this all the time. I remember being a teenager, and I was a young teenager and not having sex at that point. And I remember thinking, oh, when is this going to come? Because I want to go to this party, or I'm going to the beach, or we're going on a trip. So it's very similar to what an adult experiences as well.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Exactly. And it's not that far. And I think we sort of compartmentalize a bit. And I think there's a lot of fear and anxiety around how to approach talking about the cycle with teenagers, because we all go, well, a lot of us go immediately to, oh, you're not teaching fertility awareness method to teenagers. They can't be doing that. It's like, okay, yes, I understand where you're coming from. If you have a sexually active teenager, then you should be talking excessively all the time about condoms. That's what you need to be talking about, right? There's no denying that. Nobody's suggesting anything else. But you'd be surprised how the reaction within our space of people who are educated and informed is often like a little bit knee-jerk like that. Like, oh, well, is this what you're saying? And no, we're talking about body literacy here from 8 through to 17. Like, that's the age group we're talking about. And you're talking about like we've got in the app, we've got an in-app magazine that gets updated, which is all articles that are science-based, articles that acknowledge ovulation exists and its importance, that acknowledge that there's a follicular phase and a luteal phase, that talk about how that might affect your energy or mood or what you feel like doing. And mental health piece is huge. And then you've got the cycle journey, which is like an animated journey through the body that shows what's going on through each phase of your cycle. So you can see and, engage with that and look at different aspects of it. And then you've got all the ways to track. So you can track your cycle signs and symptoms and moods. And it was really important to me too. This other big part of it was like, even all the fantastic apps that there are, most of them still like have a majority negative bent on the cycle about what's happening. Well, the wording, I find, like every aspect of the mood that you're tracking is all negative mood aspects, and they're framed negatively. So this is a good example. So in the Teena app, instead of having like PMS and calling it like irritable, I wanted to call it fierce, so that it was like positive, because I don't like the idea that tweens or teens are immediately associating their menstrual cycle with like only negative possibilities, right?
Yeah.
And that only negative things happen to them. So like we also have like a mood tracking sticker for happy or sociable, or nicer end things, but also looking at the less maybe more difficult, more tricky emotions in a kind of like more positively skewed way, or a more empowered skewed way. And that was really important to me too. And it was also something I felt was missing even from the most excellent resources out there, that often we forget that how we talk about these things, even if we are talking about them, which is important in itself, can really sort of shape our experience over time.
Totally. As you're saying this, all I can think about is how much sort of unraveling I have to do with my clients and the women in my community around the negativity that they feel towards their menstrual cycle. And where that comes from is from childhood and the teenage years, because of their first period experience or subsequent period experiences, or the language that was used to describe it, the information they got, what kind of information it was. Like you said, how skewed was it towards one way or another? It 100% influences everything. And I have rarely in my 10, 12 years of doing this come across someone who just loved their cycle, or, had a positive experience with it. So thank God you're doing the Lord's work by educating these young people.
I totally agree too. And I looked back on my first period experience, and that's why I'm saying like 8 to 17, because like
Right.
really you need to start talking about this stuff like maybe 2 years before when they start having breast development, pubic hair, like your kid is getting to that place. You want to start talking about it. You don't want to have them get it and then talk about it. Because I
Right.
was looking back to my experience, and I mean, look at where I am now. But like at the time, I was like thought that I could like option out of it. Like I was like, why me? Like it would pass over me, that it wasn't going to happen to me. And my mom, bless her, you know, she only knows what she knows. And I mean, God, she got her period in boarding school and like
Oh,
in the whole
oh,
1950s world of that, which wasn't pleasant. So fair enough. But she wasn't giving me like positive feelings. And then my nieces, who both got their periods in the last few years at 9 and 10ish, I was, you know, having this conversation with my older sisters about this. And I was like, so passionate about them feeling positive about it, you know, and I sent them like little toy uteruses and like, you know, they're still going to be embarrassed because they're kids and they live in the world. But, you know, I was so, you know, and my sister was really on board with that, you know, that it needed to be like something that was made manageable and easy for them as much as possible, but also something that was not immediately talked about like, oh, this is awful, and like it's just a terrible thing you have to go through, or it's, you know, just it's fine to acknowledge that it's not, you know, flowers and diamonds and rose like Lisa Vanderpump said, but it's also okay to say to not like shovel it on too much, which is I think is what we're prone to do, right? Is to really sort of say like, oh, and you know, that's us projecting our own feelings onto it that have come from our experiences, like you're saying. But in my mind, I was like, okay, so this is what people are going through. And we obviously did a lot of research before this. We did survey Daisy users, for example, to find out what their experience was with first period, with their first period. And I was like, well, if you could change that, like how different would your life like unfold? And I knew from being part of like the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research, that there is research that shows that when young girls get their first period, they often have a real hit to self-esteem. So
yeah.
usually up to that point, girl, we see all the memes these days, but it's true. Like young girls are very confident, feel very powerful, feel very like adventurous and, you know, outgoing and things. And then you get the first period, and then things sort of slide down in the confidence levels and the self-esteem levels. And puberty, other elements of puberty obviously do that too. And obviously a big part of that is how the world around them reacts to that, and how the world that they live in. So my feeling was, well, what can you do that makes a difference, is to give them, at least internally, the understanding and the knowledge and the perspective that they need to at least navigate that world with more confidence and a feeling of like they can push back a bit against what they're told by the boys at school or their teacher or their own mom even. I mean, you know, like that was my feeling, is we needed to give these young people like resources to change how they felt. And that I think really starts with like not being like a period is a period, it happens around every month, you know, it's terrible, but giving like that whole picture, bigger picture.
Yeah, the bigger picture and the context really counts. A few things. It is interesting. I think that things have dramatically changed. I was just talking to someone else on another podcast about this exact thing, about how much it's shifted in the last couple of decades around girls and their menstrual cycles and just being aware of them and being more empowered. And so I just feel that Teena's entry into this space is so huge and is going to have such a huge impact. And I was thinking about my own experience of getting a period as you were talking about yours. And, my mom gave me this book, but we didn't really have a whole lot of conversation. And I knew I was getting my period because I kind of been spotting a little bit. So I knew it was coming, and I had pads in my bag. And one of my friends found one, and she totally made fun of me. And she's like, "Do you have your period? And you didn't tell me." And it's so mortifying at that age. And so, as you said, just giving them this information and this little device so that they know what the heck is going on could change everything. I mean, for me, like I said before, it would have changed the trajectory of my life for sure. And I was thinking about what you were saying as well about the resources and the fact that the only time, or the information sort of centers around, you'll be able to have a baby one of these days. Can you share a little bit more about that? Like, what else is missing from the sex ed conversation or the health education conversation? Because I don't know, I have friends with tweens and teens, and what I'm hearing from them is it's seriously lacking a lot of good information still.
If you get any at all, right? That's
Well,
definitely
yeah,
not. It's
that's so
state to
true.
state, varies so much. And I'm even learning through the content we're putting out, especially on TikTok, which is really engaged with my teens, like what they get, what age they get it, when they get it. And what seems to be really resonating is that they get taught like about periods after they've already got their period, and what they're told to their face is not their experience. So they're told like, oh, you're going to get a period every 28 days. It's going to be, 3 days long. It's going to be, they get all this information that they're like, well, hang on, that's not happening to me. So can you imagine how much anxiety that causes, right? You're like, well, am I abnormal? Is there something wrong with me? Which you spend your whole puberty years worrying about anyway, right? And a lot of them are like, this isn't what's happening to me. And a lot of them don't know what's normal, and including parents, I think. And that has knock-on effects, which is that during your teen years, when I was talking about this in 2013, your reproductive cycle is maturing, right? The connection between your brain and ovaries isn't quite completely established yet. And the hormone production is different. And so at that time, you're more likely to have irregular periods than you will when you're 4 years into having menstrual cycles, or definitely when you're an adult. Now, this isn't true for everybody, right? But that is the norm, is that you have more irregularity during those years. So you might get your first period and then not get another period for like 6 months, right? And that's not abnormal. That is part of the process. Also, that you may have heavier or more painful periods in that time than you will have when you're older or an adult, older teen or an adult. So what your experience is in that time isn't necessarily going to reflect what your experience is going to be through to menopause. And I don't think parents or teenagers are aware of that. I also don't think, like, on another second level is like the mood aspect, which I think is so important, because this conversation we're having around teen mental health right now, and especially young girls, like not knowing what happens in your luteal phase versus your follicular phase, or how you feel on ovulation versus your period, or the pressure we put on young people to do so much and achieve so much now because of the competitive nature of how things have developed for young people in terms of going to college and getting jobs. Like, we don't have any conversation around the cycle reflection on mood for young girls. They're just either always depressed and anxious or not depressed and anxious. Like, there's no nuance there in terms of the fact that they're experiencing hormones that affect their mood. And this is more than just being a moody teenager. There's more aspects to it that would be, if they were aware of, perhaps would be helpful for some of them. So, I think there's obviously none of that. There's no basic information. The information that's given is as all the averages and standards that you get from textbooks that aren't reflective of many adult women's experiences, let alone teenagers, even less so for teenagers, I think. And in terms of the idea of like, you can have a baby now. Now, what struck with me is that I don't have children. I don't plan to have children. And Gen Z is more likely to say, and this might be partly due to age, but also might be partly due to just social change, that they don't plan to have children. So at that age, there's less young women saying that this is a goal for them in the future at that point in their lives. So you're really doing a disservice to that generation to focus on the reproductive capacity as the only like value of having a menstrual cycle. And that is going to change how they feel about everything, fertility, etc. If that's not the plan for them, right, in their minds at 16, 17, 18, then that's going to change how they connect with their body and how they connect with their cycle, if they think that's all that it's there for. So I really wanted to reflect that with the app. The app was very much designed with like taking in that generation's values, which seem, they're very open and transparent about periods, much more so than our generation was. And they're much happier to talk and share about things online in general. And they're happier to talk amongst their friends about things. That's mass generalizations. I think it really varies. But they don't have the education piece so much. So like the openness is there, And we see that with like period talk and Disney movies about puberty. Although I did watch that movie, Turning Red, and I was very upset that it wasn't really about periods.
I
I
haven't
was
seen it and I
fooled.
meant to. But I'm glad to hear that it wasn't really about periods.
I was fooled by that movie. But I do think there's a real shift there generationally in what they're open to, and also how they talk about relationships between girls and boys and things like that. And so I wanted to reflect that too, because I felt like that was really missing. And I don't know how long it's going to take for us to catch up to the realization that not having children is not necessarily going to be a goal as much for that generation as it was for past generations.
That makes a lot of sense to me when I think about the women who've come to me over the years. Obviously, they're a little older than teenagers, and and even now, the 20s, late 20s, 30s women, that's their driving factor for wanting to either get off of the birth control that they're on because they're worried about their fertility. So I could see how it really required a bit of a rethink, or just sort of a re-understanding of what it is that people are motivated by, to whether it's
Mm-hmm.
track their cycle or track their symptoms or understand what's going on with their bodies if it's not fertility.
Yeah. And I think it's also just about like the app has a ton of like um accurate scientific diagrams and everything, all the information, because I think there's a real feeling as well, like I said before, of like how much information can you give this age group, and what do parents and educators feel safe in giving them. But the thing is we're taking it away. I was talking to someone about this yesterday. We're not talking about it in terms of sex or somewhat developing sexuality. We do talk about that to an extent, but not in depth. Or fertility or fertile windows or anything like that. We're making it completely separate, which allows it to be, first of all, gives it its own space, which I think is really important as a separate entity, as an experience, having a menstrual cycle, outside of when all those things happen or when that part of their life develops. But also means that, as a parent, you're like, well, how can I talk about this fully without sometimes it's how can I talk about this fully without talking fully about sex at this point. And some parents don't want to do that until later, or they do it in pieces, or it's more awkward for them because of that, or it's more uncomfortable for them, and the kids get less of what they need because of that, right? But it's not being puritanical or conservative of anything to not put all of that into the one basket. It doesn't have to be put all into the one basket. It is valuable in its own sense. It doesn't need to be a part of that same conversation. It can be talked about separately, and it can be talked about earlier, perhaps, than when you're comfortable talking to your child about sex. And then because you've talked about that, they have so much better foundation for their own understanding of everything beyond that point, right? And that's really great. I think that makes a huge difference.
It's huge. I mean, this is, I think, game changing. And I wanted to talk a little bit more in addition to what you were saying about some of the differences in teenage periods versus adult periods or more mature periods. So cycle tracking for teenagers, is there anything else you want to add in, how it's different from cycle tracking for adults?
Well, so if you take, obviously, this process is the same, although it's streamlined with Teena. You're taking your basal body temperature in the morning, which obviously is a habit, it's a discipline, but there's so much on kids these days, you getting up in the morning to go train for sports, to do extracurriculars. Like, kids are really disciplined in school. Like, they do a lot. There's a lot expected of kids these days.
Yeah, it's
Way
overwhelming.
more than when I was a kid, where
Same.
when you left school, you were kind of like nobody, whatever you were doing. Mornings were your own. These days, like every moment of their lives is like closely monitored, right? And I think anybody who wants to instill like early healthy habits in their kid, like that's all something that can be folded in the same conversation, really. And it's also about developing this idea of like, oh, okay, so every day I do something to connect with my body. It's not mindless. It's not something I don't have to think about. It's not something that's happening without my conscious engagement. And I think that's kind of part of the process of training ourselves to be more interested and engaged with ourselves, like more of the idea of like, you don't have a body, you are your body, right? And that starts early, right? Like that's rather than just the going from neck up and neck down thinking. And so the process is the same, but you're just turning the device when you're taking a temperature in the morning as a kid. It sits on your nightstand, and then it syncs very quickly to the app via Bluetooth. And you can do that every day, or if the app is on your parents' phone, you can do that once a week or whenever is comfortable. So they don't have to have a phone themselves necessarily, but most do. My nieces certainly do. And then you have this app on your phone where you can see your chart, and it's colored with menstruation, follicular, ovulation, and luteal colors instead of any fertility indicators. And then you have options to track cycle signs and symptoms, moods, stickers. And every day you get, as you track, so you can obviously download and look at all these things for free, but if you're actually tracking, you get cycle synced affirmations back to you. So during your luteal phase, you get different affirmations than you would get in your follicular phase, and you get different tips. And then you can go into the rest of the app and you can look at your, obviously, all the history and analysis and stuff, which I think is really interesting for parents who want to get early diagnosis of any teen health issues like PCOS or endometriosis or anything else that can be helped by menstrual cycle data, and having that a mass of menstrual cycle data available to use with healthcare practitioners when that happens or needs to happen. But then you can also go into all the educational materials which are updated, everything from talking about cervical fluid changes through the cycle, what happens before the first period, activities based on your cycle phase for teenagers. We've also got all the anatomy diagrams that you would want to find, everything, you know, like cervix changes. We go into everything that you on your wish list of what you wish you would know at the time, that's in there. We're not, you know, none of the science is passed over. Like, we're not deciding teenagers don't need to know that their cervix changes during the menstrual cycle. No, we've got everything in there. It's all very matter of fact, written in like a really like, I wrote this, so I know, like written in a really like big sister kind of tone. Yeah. Like, you know, that's accessible and not oversimplified.
Okay, y'all are gonna single-handedly change the landscape of teenage periods. That is so cool. I'm literally gonna go. I have the device. I'm gonna go sign up for the app so I can check this thing out. It's so cool.
Yeah, and the nice thing is, you know, we've got aspects to it. Like, you can get different. You've got 5 different colors you can choose. So there's some, you know, you can choose a blue Teena or a neon pink Teena. You know, there's different colors you can choose. And the app is like super bright and colorful and engaging. We had an amazing illustrator to do all the diagrams and illustrations for the magazine and to do this animated cycle journey. And I think, you know, one part of it is like facilitating that conversation between parents and their teenager, where you might feel that it's perhaps going to be an awkward or difficult or, you know, stressful conversation, or you just don't want to make them feel like that. So it's, you know, something that you can look at together, that you can go through together if you want to, or look at different articles, or you can leave them to look through it. It's on the phone. They love phones. They want to see it, but it's like something that's giving them positive feedback and positive energy back and education and information on their level. So
yeah, this is amazing. What about the differences between Teena and Daisy? Because like, if you have a 16-year-old, for instance, why would you give them a Teena versus a Daisy?
Well, I actually think with Teena, like, it's applicable from before your first period, like you said early on. Like, you can start tracking before your first period and it will indicate first ovulation. So obviously that gives a great idea of when the first period is going to come, which can be amazing. But then through, I say, to like late teens, but we also have some interest from college age girls too to use it, who want to track their cycle. But, you know, they're not at the place at that point to think about fertility or what they're doing in terms of contraception. So that with Teena, what you can do is you can use it as long as you feel that that's the information that you need. And then you can take that data and transfer it to a daisy in entirety.
Oh, that is so awesome.
Yes, if that
Oh,
when it
very
comes to the
convenient.
time that you feel that you want to do that. Yeah.
Right. I could think of a lot of adults who might want this Teena information, especially laid out in the way that it is so
Yeah.
easy to understand, because this is, again, the, like you've said, the period education, the body literacy education that you never got, but know you needed.
Yes, exactly. And we'll be adding to the app more as well in terms of like the education to build on the different age groups, and just building out the what you can track and things like that too. So we're really open to getting feedback from anybody who wants to like check it out and make some suggestions on what is missing at the moment.
That is so great. And I, again, thank you so much for spearheading this, because like I said in the beginning, or we talked about in the beginning, you've been doing this for a really long time. And I feel like you've come full circle, where, you know, you've spoken about the pill, and we now have a movie based on your book, you know, called The Business of Birth Control. And you know, now you've like delved into teenagers and their first cycles and educating them. So I feel like you've got like the whole catalog, Holly, at this point in
Yeah.
women's health.
And that, I mean, the thing is like that's how you really change things too. Like it is really the potentials of providing tweens and teens with positive, uh, complete scientific education on menstrual cycles, plus giving them the ability to know and avoid the potentially traumatic experiences of surprise and shock around like late and missing and untracked what they feel are unpredictable periods.
Mhm.
Like the combination of those two things is it has really incredible potential, I think.
Absolutely. Yes,
Hmm.
world domination potential, I believe. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I would love for you to just tell everyone who's listening where they can find the Teena and more information and purchase one of these, whether it's for their child or somebody else's child that they know. I'm sure that people will be very excited to know this exists.
Yeah, so we're at myteena.com, which is Teena, like teenager, myteena.com. And you can download the app from any of the app stores in the US, the UK, and most European countries. You go to type in Teena, Teena, period guide or Teena guide, and that's the best way to find it. Otherwise, it might populate to teenager. And the app is free to download. So all those educational resources I'm talking about, you can browse and look at those at your own, pace as you want to see what you think about it. And then the device is available on myteena.com. And we have a discount code period that you can put in right now if you're listening, and you get a discount on that. But it's already under a launch special anyway until the end of this month. And so then, yeah, then you can just sync it with the app when you're ready, and then you're away.
And off we go.
Oh, and you can follow us on social media on Instagram and TikTok at We Are Teena. So,
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
mm-hmm.
Yes, I got a shout out. We were having this conversation about TikTok, and Holly's videos are incredible. I'm blown away by the effort because, as you were saying, you've had many videos go totally viral, which, you
Yes.
know, in social media is a really big deal, especially if you have a business and you're trying to sell a product. It really helps. So I'm very impressed. And so I just want to give a shout out to your TikTok because it's very cool.
Yeah, and we really try and break things down. We have like a nice blend of educational videos on there that are doing things like how to use a tampon or how to tell your mom you got your period, things that you can like forward or text to your tween or teen if you want to as well. And then like along with the trends where we're like bringing in like Trojan horse style, like pieces of information about what's normal for teen periods, but using like the TikTok trends.
Awesome. I'm so impressed. I really am. Because as I was saying to you, TikTok is still that sort of undiscovered frontier for me. I can't quite get there yet, but one of these days. Anyways, Holly, thank you so, so much for all the work that you've been doing over the last decade and for all of this amazing new work that you've done with Teena. I'm so excited to check out this device and share about it with everyone because I feel like this information is so, so needed. And I really do think it's going to shift the paradigm. We're not going to have people who are so, feel so uneducated and so unequipped to deal with their menstrual cycles or problems that come up with their cycles and fertility in the future because this information is now so readily available. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on to talk about it.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at nicolejardim.com/quiz.